This panel brings together leading scientific figures in the UAE, and will explore how the polar regions serve as a bridge connecting Asia with the global community. So we're going to hear about the collaborative expeditions, the work being conducted at the Polar Research Center, and how partnerships, both global and local, can address some of the most urgent challenges and drive both scientific discoveries and innovation. So I'd like to begin with a brief introduction of our esteemed panelists. Tonight, we're joined by Dr. Samuel Mao, who is the Senior Director of Masdar Institute and Co-Director of the Polar Research Center at Khalifa University. Dr. Aisha Suwaidi, the first Emirati polar scientist and Associate Professor of Earth Sciences and a leading paleoclimate researcher at Khalifa University. Professor Ernesto Damiani, Dean of Computing and Mathematical Sciences at Khalifa University, and currently researching AI and machine learning. And last but not least, Mr. Ahmed Al-Kaabi, Head of Meteorological and Geophysical Studies at the National Center of Meteorology in the UAE, who recently came back from a historic first ever UAE-Bulgarian joint expedition to Antarctica. So I'd like to remind everybody, you know the drill, that we're bound by time and the questions are going to be towards the end. So we've heard yesterday from our non-polar friends in Singapore, Korea, and India on their incentives in becoming a part of the Arctic conversations. We're also planning for the next forum in Italy, another non-polar country. We've launched the Emirates Polar Program during the plenary last night, and we spoke about the reason the UAE launched a polar program. But I'd like to remind everybody and start the conversation today with the why that's specific to the United Arab Emirates. So, Dr. Sam, could you shed some light on why a country like the UAE, geographically distant from the polar regions, should be investing time, resources, and scientific capacity into polar research?
It's a really good question. I think many people also ask me the same question. I'd like to answer this from three angles. The first one, look at climate change. UAE is a coastal country. The climate change associated, for example, the sea level rise, the coastal erosion, and the weather pattern change would all affect the UAE. And like many colleagues mentioned yesterday and earlier today, that the world becomes interconnected in terms of climate change. So this is my first point. The second point is the UAE is a leader, regional leader, a leader of the Arab world, and not only in diplomacy but also in scientific knowledge. And the Emirate Polar Program and the associated the Polar Research Center are considered to be the nature extension of the leadership in science and technology, in particular, to understand, to mitigate the climate change. The third angle I look at is really the science and technology capabilities, which have been established over the past decade, in particular in the areas of AI, artificial intelligence, in robotics, and in renewable energies. AI technologies, we have factories, really leading leading factory members. They have been working with the polar scientists to try to predict, to make better models for sea ice forecasting and weather pattern modeling. The robotics, we are developing underwater robotics, which potentially be useful for the polar region like Antarctica, the undersea, the sea ice exploration. And for the renewable energies, and we have unique technologies to implement renewable energies, which would be useful for the polar region communities, in particular to provide off-the-grid the polar energy power solutions. So these are the three angles I'd like to answer your question.
Very interesting. Could you elaborate further on how the research agenda and the research priorities were set for the UAE in polar sciences?
Thank you. And I mentioned the climate change. This is one of the foremost the top reasons that the topics of the Polar Research Center aligns closely with UAE's national priorities for the climate change sustainability. And the second is we have the UAE government have led a number of workshops, discussion groups to try to prioritize what need to be done for the UAE, what the UAE can offer to the overall polar communities. The third one is we have reach out to not only local UAE scientists, but also scientists in polar region, polar countries globally. I think yesterday, and we have an announcement of collaboration with the UIT, the Norway, and we are working with them. We have visited them, and we have constant collaborations with UIT and other institutions to understand what would be really needed. The third one. The fourth one is, again, I mentioned earlier, the capabilities. We have AI, robotics, renewable energy, and now we have expertise in modeling simulations. All these combine to the point that we do, UAE can help the polar region, can contribute significantly to the polar science and technology development. And I want to add one more thing is for the Polar Research Center, you just mentioned, we have two major research themes. One is on the polar exploration, more on the science aspect to study the geodynamics, the cryosphere, the ecology, and so on. The second part is one uniqueness for UAE's Polar Research Center is to develop unique technologies to support the worldwide polar research community, from AI mentioned, and better forecasting, for the robotics, for the renewable energy technologies, and so on.
Thank you. Dr. Aisha, you are the first Emirati polar scientist, and you're an integral part of the Polar Research Center faculty. As Dr. Sam mentioned, there's thematic areas at the Polar Research Center. Could you please highlight these areas and the thematic research that's being conducted at the center at the moment?
Thanks, Lilia. Thanks, Sam. I think Sam gave a very good initial overview of what we're trying to accomplish. And what we're trying to accomplish is really very interdisciplinary and very collaborative. And so, as Sam mentioned, we have these two big overarching themes, one in scientific exploration of the poles and polar regions, and one in technology solutions for the poles and polar regions. But a really important part of this, and one of the reasons why it's in a university and not a standalone entity or at an NGO, is that we also have an element of education and engagement. And as a university, that's our core business. Our core business is education and engagement of the public. And so the center, as it's been developed and designed, is to intersect these three core areas: the science, the engineering and technology solutions, and the education and engagement of the public. And we're doing that through different topics within these themes. So within education and engagement, we want to develop polar-focused curriculum, and we already do that. In fact, I teach, and I will be teaching in the autumn, a course on geomorphology and geohazards, and we already use in that course a lot of material that comes from ICIMOD. And many people in the last 2 days have talked about that, the glacial dams bursting and lakes flooding and permafrost changes, and these are all things I already cover in this course. And we hope to develop more kinds of emphasis on things like the polar nexus and the interrelationship between the poles and the Arabian climate and the monsoonal climate. And so enhancing our curriculum through polar-focused curriculum development is really core to what we're hoping to do, as well as having things like teacher training and polar science fairs, supporting polar expeditions by UAE scientists and researchers and engineers, and also having student exchanges. And I think you heard the other day from the provost from UIT about the 2 UAE students who will be joining the Arctic cruise over the summer. And so that's something which we're already doing. And so this is a very, very young program, but we're already participating in these programs. From our scientific exploration side, what we really looked at, and as Sam mentioned, we looked at the national base of expertise that we have, and we also looked at our international collaborations. And so we wanted to pick up themes where we have strengths. So not just to, reinvent the wheel, let's say, but look at where do we have expertise, where do we have our strengths. And the topics that we're really focused on in our scientific exploration is things like cryospheric dynamics, polar environments and ecology, climate extremes and polar tipping points, which is my specific area of interest, let's say, polar geodynamics and tectonics, as well as polar oceanography. So these are our kind of core scientific themes that our research is going to fall under in the science arena. From the technology side, we have a lot of strengths in the UAE and at Khalifa University related to technology development, deployment. And so from the technology side, we want to look at things like sustainable power generation and energy storage in polar environments, autonomous instruments and systems for polar monitoring. And this is something which we really need. It's great to send a scientist to the polar region, but scientists can only go to the polar region for short times or narrow windows. So having technologies which can support continuous monitoring in the polar regions, as we've heard the last 2 days, is really critical. And this is something that we can contribute to, I think, as well as Earth observation of the polar regions and artificial intelligence tools to enhance polar observation and forecasting. So these are really our core competencies that we feel we have to contribute to the polar sciences. And this is going to be the focus of the Polar Research Center at Khalifa University. And the center isn't just for Khalifa University, it's for the whole of the UAE. And so part of that is engagement of entities like NCM as well as other universities and entities within the UAE.
Thank you, Dr. Aisha. I think I'm happy you mentioned that it is a fairly new program, and considering it was just launched locally in the UAE in November, and just yesterday internationally, I think this is a very impressive list. So thanks for that. I'd like to pick up on that last point regarding artificial intelligence. The world and the UAE in specific are moving rapidly into investing into AI and AI-based solutions. We've also heard yesterday from the pro-rector at UIT that one of the areas of added value from the UAE-UIT collaboration for science is utilizing the UAE's AI capabilities. So to that end, Dr. Ernesto, your work focuses a lot on AI tool development capabilities. So I wanted to ask, are there any new technologies that are making fieldwork easier or more accurate?
Well, actually, it's a moment of discontinuity. So this is one of the reasons why I think it's so interesting to join the polar research movement at this particular point in time. And what is the discontinuity that I see coming up? The discontinuity is the discontinuity in the models that we can do and in the model that we should do. Models that we can do, because of course there is the notion that, well, it's a fragmented world, and the larger scale frameworks for data collection are something, a thing of the past. We need to work in a community where everybody is collaborating, but at its own conditions, and maybe the framework for collaboration is changing. Secondly, we have the opportunity of handling that scenario thanks to the new generations of models that we are using. So we are using models that can be fusioned, that can be trained with a basic training and then adapted through transfer learning to domain adaptation. We are using models that can be exchanged by exchanging parameters instead of exchanging data. So we are using the version of the new generation of LLMs specifically in this framework. This is a big opportunity because, well, polar research has used AI for a very long time. And we're not doing anything new here from that point of view. But this type of AI hasn't been around for such a long time. So visual, multimodality, that can bring together data from different sources, that can create models that can be exchanged without exchanging the data. This is all something that we do every day. We do it for climate modeling, we do it for wildlife monitoring, we do it for a number of applications. I don't want to bore you with things, but certainly it's very exciting that we can jump on the wagon with these type of models that we are accustomed to developing, and we can try to put them at the service of the community. I learned a lot in these particular days on the needs and the requirements, and I think that we will be able to provide a meaningful contribution.
So that naturally leads me to my next question. Do you envision a practical use case to leverage AI in polar sciences?
Well, of course there are many, and I was just leading from a list. I was forgetting navigation and safety because Sam mentioned robotics many times. So certainly this new type of AI models that we are trying to develop, not just us, with the help of our Norwegian partners, with the help of the others that are working in the area, are models that lend themselves at the new generation, for example, of climate change indicators. This is my favorite type of application, where we can look at multimodal data, multimodal traces in different modalities, meaning from very different sources and very different sensors, also without the need for synchronization of data collection, so data that have been collected in different moments by different people with different degrees of trustworthiness, different degrees of, and we can still put them together to synthesize a valid indicator, and we can prove that the indicator is useful for decision making. So this is, in my opinion, is my favorite one. Can we look at the same time at the permafrost changes, at the reflection on the snow, at very different type of data, as I said, collecting the different moment and put them together to get meaningful advice for decision making. This is, I think, the most promising frontier for this type of research.
Thank you, Dr. Ernesto. I'd like to move on to you, Mr. Ahmed. Firstly, congratulations on coming back from the expedition to Antarctica. And considering that, could you firstly shed some light on the purpose and the outcomes of that expedition? And secondly, how do you maintain or repair equipment when you're in a remote location?
Thank you, Lulia, for your question. So a few months ago, we have achieved a historic milestone for the UAE by installing the first fully automated weather station to monitor the climate change in Livingston Island in Antarctica, and as well as 2 sensors in a seismic station to monitor the seismic, volcanic, and ice movement. We faced many challenges at the beginning. We had to work for several hours in different and difficult terrain, carrying heavy equipments and batteries. We worked for several hours, more than 10 hours a day, in a very harsh environment. We have to think smartly to finish the project in a very limited time, within 2 weeks frame time, and other things such as sleeping hours, food, the Drake Passage, and limited resources. But the end was pleasing, which will add a value to the humanity and science. We are receiving the data from the weather station to the National Center of Meteorology, to the data center, by using satellite communication, which will help Emirati scientists in collaboration with international scientists and international scientific communities to be able to do their research and studies. For the seismic station, we haven't made the live data yet, but we are planning to do this on the next expedition. Sorry, I missed your second question.
My question was just the purpose and the outcomes of your expedition, but you've covered that, so thank you. But I have a follow-up question. You've mentioned some of the challenges that you faced, but I wanted to ask specifically about the challenges that you face in collecting data in such remote areas, if you can shed some light on that.
Indeed. Data collection will be very difficult on remote locations, and repairing and maintaining scientific equipment as well as the sensors is very challengeable. But for some reasons, extreme weather conditions and limited accessibility, equipment reliability and short working hours daily, safety risk and communication limitation, logistic complexity and environmental protocol regulation, and finally the power. Imagine the sunlight in Antarctica during summertime, almost 24 hours, but in wintertime, 24 hours of moonlight. If you will be able to see the moon there, you have to be at 60 degrees latitude north or south, and below, not above. So with that, it's very difficult to maintain and repair the scientific equipment. But with careful planning and specialized techniques, as well as advanced technologies, researchers can keep essential systems running in such extreme conditions. By regular and scheduled joint visits with the members, and using redundant equipment, such as adding extra sensors for the most important parameters that you want to collect the data for, or adding extra batteries to reduce the total failures or the likelihood of total failures of the equipment. Using two-way satellite communication to configure or troubleshoot that sensor. And recently, the world is going for the AI to predict potential equipment failure by analyzing the trend in the data being collected by the sensor. Also, we can add drones and on-foot and underwater robotics that can help with that.
Thank you. And my final question is, considering the challenges that you've faced and considering the conversations we've been having about the need for collaboration, in your opinion, what kind of support or partnerships are needed to make this polar research happen smoothly?
That's a very good question. Research and field studies in polar regions as well as the third pole requires a broad band of support and partnership to succeed. In terms of international collaboration and logistic support, through collaborative missions, to accept joint expeditions with non-consultative members in Antarctica or non-members in the Arctic Council as well as the third pole. Additionally, sharing the transportation of the icebreakers, the ice ships, and the chartered flights. Also, add to that the station and the camps by providing shelters, lab accessibility, and communication facilities to the researchers. In terms of funding and investment, most of us knows that those programs, they require a big support financially, and normally this is done by the government. So we need the public-private partnership to support research in exchange for data or collaboration in technology. In terms of scientific collaboration, data sharing will enhance and enrich research and studies and will add a big value to it. Also, getting multidisciplinary teams involved with more scientists in climate, glaciologists, oceanographers, and biologists. Those things will make research in polar areas as well as the third pole smoother.
Thank you. So I'm glad you brought up the third pole because that leads me to my next question. So as many of us here know that the UAE will be co-hosting the next UN Water Conference 2026, and we know of the close affinity of water and ice cycles and their importance to the livelihood of the people in the vicinity, such as the Arctic, the Hindu Kush, Himalaya regions. We've also heard yesterday about the importance of the people in these regions and how during the next Arctic Council chairship, the indigenous communities are of top priority. So I want to zoom into the sociodemographics for a bit. Dr. Aisha, can you tell us what role can non-polar scientists and the UAE in specific play in enhancing the livelihoods of people in these regions?
Well, I think the first thing we have to keep in mind is the size of the populations impacted in the Hindu-Kush Himalayas. You know, we're talking about 250 million people. Comparatively, the population of the UAE is only 11 million. Yes, it's growing, but it's still, you know, we're nothing compared to that population. But a very large proportion of our population in the UAE actually comes from the Hindu-Kush region. So we have this very close alliance and affinity to the people of that region. And for a long time, you know, we've had lots of very strong diplomatic relationships with those people. Our weather in the UAE is directly impacted by the Himalayan mountains, by the monsoonal cycles, by the ENSO and other climatic and weather systems. And so we are very strongly linked to those communities and to the climate perturbations that affect them. If there's a climate disaster there, you know, we are a very close country to them, and so we're a first responder nation in a way. And we saw this with earthquakes that have happened in the Himalayas. You know, the UAE is always there from a humanitarian perspective. So we have these very, very close links, and so it becomes really critical for us, I think, as a nation, to think about the scientific and technological solutions that we can support the third pole region with. You know, whether that's through education programs or through, you know, collaborative efforts of research to look at some of the challenges they face and think about what artificial intelligence or remote sensing or technology-driven solutions we can offer to those populations. I think we heard today a lot about the water challenges that these communities are going to face as they start to lose the glaciers, which feed the lakes and the reservoirs and the hydropower systems that these communities rely on. And, the UAE is a water-poor country. We rely very heavily on technological solutions for our water supply, right? And we are moving, as you've heard, the UAE is very involved in net zero, carbon neutrality, and having an energy grid which is carbon neutral. And these are all things that we've been working on, for a decade now, more than a decade in the UAE. And these are engineering and scientific solutions and research which can really support those communities. If we think about our water challenges in the UAE, we've overcome them through lots of different technologies. And so can we deploy those technologies in the Hindu-Kush region to support those communities? Are the technologies that we have for water harvesting, for energy, power grid solutions that can support those communities? Can we do scientific research jointly with entities in the third pole which will answer some of the challenges that they have? So I think there's a lot that we can offer through collaboration, and I think next year, with having this, the UN Water Year in the UAE, we can really start to look at dialogues about how we can take some of the knowledge and experience that we have as a people coming from the desert and the sea to those people who are living in the Himalayan mountain regions, who are going to be really impacted by climate change. And we really have to think about forecasting as well. Ahmed talked about forecasting, and Nesser talked about forecasting and AI. And, if weather and meteorological patterns change in the Himalayan region and the monsoon cycle changes, it impacts us in the UAE very directly. And we saw this last year. Last year we had 3 extreme weather phenomena in the UAE that resulted in extreme flooding, which I think everybody saw on the international news in April. And only this year has Dubai finally recovered on the highways from that extreme flooding. And that is directly linked to climate change and changes in the monsoonal patterns. And so we have this very strong connection with that community and the issues that they face, and predicting climatic change events that we might see, or weather phenomena that we might see, and how they will impact us, be that a heat wave or a pluvial, extreme flooding event, whatever it is. If we have technologies or we have capabilities from research perspective to develop technologies and predictive weather technologies, then I think we can help to deploy them in those communities.
Thank you. I think this really reemphasizes everything that we've been speaking about the past 2 days, that really it's just all hands on deck, and it's not just an Arctic issue, but it's a global issue. So thank you, Dr. Aisha. To that end, Dr. Sam, I'd like to ask you, how can non-polar nations who wish to engage in polar research access or enhance research resources and facilities within the polar networks?
It's a really good question, and we know that there are many unanswered questions in polar science, and also there are many needs of improved and new technologies to enhance the polar exploration. For non-polar nations like the UAE, there are expertise which can contribute to enhancing, improving the understanding of polar science, to develop technologies which could enhance, improve the polar exploration. So some of the examples we already mentioned, the AI, robotics, and so on. And in order for non-polar countries to be successful, to make a really high impact in polar science, the important part is the collaboration, close collaboration with, in particular, the polar region countries, like we have been doing as a new center. We have been developing joint research projects with polar region countries, polar countries. We've been engaging with them to develop polar expedition programs, including using their polar field facilities such as Antarctica research stations. And we're also developing more traditional student research exchange programs. So their students can come to the UAE, and our students can go there to get training. They can come here to learn the newest technologies, the AI, robotics, and the climate modeling, and so on.
Thank you. And I guess a final question for all, a few minutes for each. How can non-polar nations drive renewed interest in innovation and conservation and preservation of the polar regions?
Okay, in short, non-polar nations can act as innovators, funders, diplomats, educators, and global referees, even though from thousands of kilometers away. Thank you.
Thank you, Ahmed. Dr. Aisha?
Well, I think we have a lot to offer, really, because we are coming with a fresh vision of what polar research should look like. You know, if we look at historically who are the countries that have been strong in polar research, you know, we're talking about the UK, the US, Italy, and lots of other European nations, as well as Russia, obviously, and China and India. But we're new to this game, so we're really coming with a fresh vision. And we're able to look at what has been done and see where the gaps are. And I think that's something the UAE has done very, very well. Just as a small anecdote, the first president of the UAE, Sheikh Zayed, wanted to grow tomatoes in the desert. And everybody said to him this wasn't possible. And he said, no, we can make it happen. We can bring the technology. We can do it. And he did. And now we have an overabundance of tomatoes in the UAE. So I think we can do the same thing in the polar regions where people have said, well, we can't go there. It's too far away. It's too isolated. We don't have the technology. I think our mentality in the UAE is that we can. And so what we can bring is a new vision and a new look at the challenges that people have faced with polar expeditions.
If I just can add to that, I think also with extreme weather conditions, as you rightfully mentioned, we are a desert, so we're the extreme opposite. So extreme weather conditions, also technologies might apply to us that we could transfer to the extreme cold. Dr. Ernesto.
Yeah, I just want to add that having Italian roots myself, I can tell you they are pretty good tomatoes. Not just that they succeeded in growing them, they are also very good quality. So, but let me say, I just want to give you an example of what we can offer. The UAE has been the first country in which we develop large language models, specifically large language models that are suitable for producing actionable information, meaning that they are not just generating answers like ChatGPT, they are providing recipes for action. And the recipe for action can be an action that is functional to a larger experimental setting, like where to put a sensor, or they can be answers that can help the human decision maker. So we can do that. We can do based on visual models, visual data. We can do models that can provide actionable information. But the second thing is that we can do them small. Small can be deployed at the edge, can be deployed on the robots. This is our specialty. And this is a specialty that puts us in the position to contribute, of course, with the help of everyone else, to the new generation of technology for polar research. This is why personally I'm here. I think there is a frontier to be crossed. And the difficulties, well, as I said, mostly are collaboration difficulties. So we need to find a robust technology that allows for different models of collaboration to achieve the results. I think we can help.
The final words, I think my colleagues covered many specifics. I don't need to repeat those things. As a new research center, Polar Center, and the last sentence I want to say is, we really welcome collaboration from all parties here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sam. Yes, I'd like to echo that as well. I think collaboration is vital, and we can't move forward if we're not working together. So I'd like to open the floor for any questions that anybody may have. We're actually good on time, so if there are any questions, yep, to the gentleman there.
Hello everyone, this is Aryan Punia from IIT Virtual Electrical Engineering. My question is to Professor Ernesto. As UAE being the part of International Solar Alliance, and we have seen that solar power is being on a verge of renewable energy and solving that issue. So how is UAE taking the problem of distribution and the power losses that happens in solar power? So what's your outlook, what's your thought on that?
We're good on time, so feel free to answer that, and then we'll take the next question.
Okay, what I can say is only that this is one of the big problems for which we used to have traditional models, and the traditional models work well if everybody is telling the truth. So if you have trustworthy contributions and you can create data sets that can be used for doing the type of optimization unfortunately, when you have multiple producers of energy, when you have multiple plants, especially the small ones, the big models that put everything together will not work due to the fact that you have heterogeneous quality of the data contributions. So what you want is actually a way to take the models, small models, and put their answers together. So this is what we do all the time with small models for handling complex networks. Rather than trying to build a large model of the network and optimize it, we try to put together the local knowledge in a sort of in a way that compensates non-uniform trustworthiness of the data collection. This is what we do every day.
Thank you. I think I saw a hand over there.
I'm Region from Kathmandu University, Nepal. Professor Aisha and Dr. Samuel, Professor Samuel, very rightly commented that you have already started the polar programs, and you have already teaching some glaciological courses, and you have already sent some of your students to researchers in Arctic and Antarctica also. And regarding the collaborations, I think in Kathmandu University also we have started from 2011 Master by Research in Glaciology, and still we are having some students on glaciology as well as in the PhD students also. So we are taking them to this field in the Himalayas, and we can have also student exchange so that we can send your students to the Himalayas so that they will know the first-hand experience on how to work in the such harsh Himalayan conditions. And that will be also very helpful to you when you send to the Antarctica and the Arctic regions. That will be very good. So we are very open to collaboration. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, you know, as we build the future Earth, climate, eco scientists, all these different scientists, the fieldwork component is very critical, and it's an important part of our programs at Khalifa University as our fieldwork. And I think we are open to collaborations and discussions about how we can enhance our programs, especially as we're building them up and we're building capabilities. So we welcome those discussions and dialogues. And you know, we'll pass you our information after this. So yeah.
Thank you. There was a question in the back, I think. Yes.
Either Aisha or Ahmed. I'm interested in some extreme weather event over Arabian Peninsula, maybe, or UAE. Particularly, I think in winter time, when there is less sea ice in the Arctic, then might give some so-called blocking in the rural area, and that gives stronger Siberian high than normal years. That probably will influence the not only the Indian subcontinent and also probably up to the Arabia. So that is quite well known. Do you have that kind of the increasing extreme event, either frequency or magnitude in your area?
Yeah, so we do see both extreme events. So just 2 weeks ago, we had a very, very severe dust event. And it actually started in Iraq and is a result of other activities which happened even further north, basically. And you couldn't see the city of Abu Dhabi because of the dust. It was really extreme. And so we are seeing an increase in the intensity of these events and the frequency of these events. As I mentioned, the pluvial events we had last year, these extreme flooding events, they were really concerning because we had a very hard time to predict them happening, actually. And so we are seeing an increase, one, in temperatures. So if we look at our forecasts, historical forecasts and sea surface temperatures, we're seeing all of those increasing in the UAE. And the number of days where we have these extreme heat events, high heat index is increasing. Extreme rainfall events is increasing, but we're also seeing a decrease in the amount of rainfall we receive. So we see more extreme events, but less overall rainfall. We see more dust events, right? And these are all things that, if we look at paleoclimate, are things that we would expect to see. So we are seeing a direct effect of changes in the Arctic and in the Himalayas, and those are quantifiable and measurable, I think.
That's actually, to my understanding, up to recently, only the atmosphere role was very important. But from now on, with the sea surface warming, surface ocean warming, that gives the all kinds of extreme event, especially like heavy rainfall or dry. That kind of, but the dry is a little bit different story. But like I'm from Korean, South Korea, so the Korean Peninsula also recently very heavy rainfall, even in the springtime or winter time. That's due to the probably surface ocean warming. So probably around your area also probably occurs in a similar way, I guess. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think one of the big things, and maybe Ahmed can comment on this, is we have very high humidity in the UAE, but very low cloud coverage. So, and we see sea surface temperatures have increased. So last year in September, I was on the UAE's premier research vessel, the J1, and we were measuring sea surface temperatures. And off the UAE coast, the sea surface temperatures can reach 32 degrees Celsius. So it's like a hot bath, right, in September. And those temperatures have been increasing. So our humidity is very high, but because our cloud cover is not very high, we just don't get rainfall. And so NCM, for example, has a rain enhancement program that they've been working on for a long time. And they do a lot of modeling and looking at, what is the cloud cover we have? How can we enhance clouds that produce rain and things like that? And so, yes, we see sea surface temperatures increasing, but what we don't see is the reciprocal increase in rainfall because of our latitude, effectively. Yeah.
Mr. Ahmed, from a meteorological perspective, would you want to add anything to that very briefly?
Yes, I wouldn't go in details about it, but yes, we are highly impacted by the Indian monsoon as well as the North Indian Ocean sea surface temperatures that's linked or associated with the Arabian Sea on the monsoon season. And as you mentioned, the Siberian high on its season in June, July, January, February, March. We also have noticed that the extreme events have a correlation between the Arabian Sea and the Siberian high changes, which has a relation with the Arctic ocean changes. Yes.
And one thing I want to note is during the monsoon season, the energy is from the equator rather than from the Arctic. So I think you should distinguish whether the influence is from the Arctic or lower latitude. I think, yeah.
I just wanted to add that maybe can be interesting because together with NCM and
Sure.
with the University of California, San Diego, what we are doing in that case is to doing small multimodal models that put together the radar echo, put together the satellite image, but also put together whatever sensors you have on the ground. And it's very heterogeneous and, well, the coverage is patchy. So this is the type of progress I was mentioning in order to quantify the quality of the clouds. So here, when you want to know whether the cloud is good to be, for example, turned into rain, but also the quality of the cloud coverage. So this is something that you can do with a small model. And I think that besides the actionable knowledge, which is what can you do if you want to increase the precipitation, you can also try to come up with some knowledge in terms of understanding understanding the trends of the phenomena through the internal parameters of the model, to studying how the model changes in time, not only studying how the raw data are, but also how the secondary data, which are the internal part of the model.
Thank you. One more question, please.
Hi, good evening. I'm Rahul. I lead Weissen House. We're a policy planning think tank specialize in foreign policy. I promise I will not touch geopolitics, though I heard Ahmed speaking about UAE acting as a referee. I wanted to know more about the data you generate, right? Universities, think tanks, research institutions generate a lot of data. And the problem with those data is it is usually confined in silos and not, disseminated, especially injected into the policy sphere, policy circle or the policy ecosystem. How do you want to do it in the UAE? Do you have aspirations for that? Do you have a roadmap for that?
So in the Polar Research Center, one of the core mandates is actually to create a publicly accessible infrastructure for data and data management. So that includes any publications, any data generated. And so it's very important to us that whatever we do in the UAE is open and accessible to the world. And what policymakers do with that data, that's at their discretion, right? But we hope that, we're very new. The Polar Research Center was only launched in November last year. We're still paving a way, and we look to our collaborators for how we can do this and how we can do it well. And I think our ambition is that, whatever we do for the betterment of the whole world, not just ourselves. And so we hope that we can build an infrastructure that will be accessible to everybody.
But let me add one thing on this, because the raw data collection is the problem, major problem. It is a major problem in a number of fields. So I don't want now to enter into the details, but the way around it is a certified generation. So the raw data that you have are used to train generative models, and the generative models will generate data that can be certified in terms of the quality. And in turn, these models can be used to train other models. So this is the pipeline. Of course, you need to find a way to get good quality of raw data for the purpose of getting the generators. But this is much less. The myth of having very large amounts of certified data collected collaboratively, it was just a myth. So I see a lot of people nodding. So we tried, but what we have now is the capability to get good data, small quantities, and to bring them through generative models to the size that we need in order to train the important decision-making models.
Thank you both. We have time for one more question, one final question over there. And if the answers are brief, I might take one last one.
Add something really
very briefly, please.
Yeah. The data repository, one of the important things, and you asked us what we can add, when we look at the existing polar programs, accessing their data is very difficult, especially for us as a non-polar country. So we hope that we don't do this. We hope that we become open to everybody.
Thank you for a great session. My first question, I'm going to use science diplomacy as a resource to build the bridges between non-Arctic and Arctic states. And if you go into use science diplomacy, probably you should need to participate more in Arctic conference among Arctic countries. And probably, by the way, in my country, we have almost every month such conference. So I invite you.
Thank you.
Where are you from?
Yeah. Russia.
Thank you. Yes, we as we said, we welcome and we're open to any and all collaborations, and we're very happy.
And how are you going to use science diplomacy? This is a pretty modern tool in geopolitics, and it's a useful tool for non-Arctic states to get much, to improve its position in the Arctic geopolitics.
I think this is a question for Wasim, really, not us as a panel, maybe.
Well, as a scientist, I would say that we are open to collaborations of any institutions which has a reputable, peaceful exploration of polar program.
Yeah, I'd just like to very briefly echo that, because it is a scientist conversation. So we hope that our scientists can collaborate and can continue the work moving forward despite any geopolitical situation. So I hope that answers your question.
Are you planning to work on biodiversity issues or biodiversity, ecological processes, ecosystems in the polar regions? The answer is yes. We have that in our mandate because it's important to the UAE. We have to look a bit better right now at our national capabilities in terms of the people who work on those areas. But I think we will, yes. Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Asha. Thank you, everybody. It's we're out of time. I'm so sorry, but I think you can continue this conversation during the dinner reception. Everybody's open to having a conversation. So thank you for joining us, and I hope you've learned something new, and I hope this was both interesting and insightful. Thank you to our panelists.